Hi, welcome everyone. So a good morning, good evening, good afternoon to wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of the Uncast Show. Now today as a guest I've got an Unraid legend. I'm going to be chatting to Andrew Zawadzki. Now you may know him as Squid, and he's written a lot of plugins. Probably the most famous is Community Applications, which is the Unraid App Store. So I can't wait to be speaking to him about that. Now, another exciting thing that's happened this week is it's here. ZFS has arrived on Unraid 6.12 RC. And you bet I'm going to be talking to Andrew all about that as well. Let's not keep our guests waiting anymore. Let's get on with the show. Okay, so good afternoon, Andrew. So thank you very much for taking time out on your Sunday to join us on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
You're over in Canada, in Ontario. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. I'm just north of the border from Buffalo, New York.
So Ontario's quite near Niagara Falls. That is the county with that, yeah?
Yeah. Niagara Falls is about 10, 15 minutes away from me. So, yeah, it's a nice little tourist trap.
I've never been to Canada, but, you know, my best friend, he moved there probably about 10 or 15 years ago. And
oh, yeah.
I keep threatening to go there, but I haven't got around to it yet. I really should. You know, 15 years is too long.
Yeah, well, if you're ever in the area, you know, stop by. I'm not a very good tour guide or anything like that. I live here, so it's seeing Niagara Falls and all the tourist traps and whatnot. That's just background noise for me.
Like, I think if someone came to the UK, I kind of wouldn't really know where to take them, you know. Well, when you live there, you don't really know, do you?
No, I did all the touristy things as a teenager, and it's quite a number of decades ago, and I don't know how things are anymore.
What shall I call you? Shall I call you Squid or shall I call you Andrew? What do you prefer in the podcast?
Andrew's fine.
I only know you as Squid, so it's quite hard for me to kind of like, you know, get that in my mind.
I always get a laugh out of people that call me Mr. Squid in the forum. Like, no, Mr. Squid would be my father. Just call me Squid. But Andrew's more than sufficient for this right now.
The forum name, where did the name Squid actually come from?
Squid it was actually my first job. I was working in a computer store back in the 1986. And the one coworker used to say, "You're just a lowly little squid," and the name kind of stuck with that.
I always thought it was from your kind of like avatar picture, the from Tripping the Riff, the little chode, I think he's called. Is that right?
Presumably, your viewers can look up what chode actually means. It's not the truth regards to me. My wife will hopefully attest to that. Chode and Squid don't really have anything to do with each other there. It's just, he's just a character. He's, I don't know, kind of my hero. I wish I was him sometimes.
Yeah, just over the last few weeks, I've been watching a few episodes because I'd never heard of it before. You know, it's bloody funny actually. You know.
Yeah, it's different. It was trailbreaking at the time, but before its time, and it never really took off in the States. It's a Canadian show, though, so that's a double plus for me.
What are you watching at the moment? Anything at all?
As far as the new stuff concerned, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks, that's my kind of thing. I do watch a lot of air crash investigation or Mayday. I have to fly a fair number of times, and it's always curious as to why planes crash and whatnot.
Maybe not the best thing to watch just before you get on the flight, though.
Oh, just before I get onto a flight, I'm always looking up the plane and seeing what problems it has.
I think I'd rather not know.
Yeah, well.
I've been watching The Mandalorian. I'm a bit of a Star Wars fan.
We watched the first season. I have yet to watch the second one, but it's on the to-do list. So
anyway, you know, what first got you into computers, and you know, what was your first computer?
First computer was actually a TRS-80. Getting into computers, it was because back when I was in grade 6, I was fortunate enough that the school had a computer lab. for us in grade 6, and this is 1982. My parents saw that, well, they had computers, and this was something I wound up getting interested in, so they wound up buying me the same computer that they had in the lab there. It just kind of went from there. A monochrome, effectively text only, no real graphics, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I don't think we had Tandy computers in the UK. We had the shop Tandy. They sold like electronics and stuff. That's where I got my first computer, Atari 800 XL. I love that and still do today. I've got one in the background over there on the shelf.
Yeah, I missed my Amiga 3000 I had.
I always wanted one of them that had the 32-bit CPU. I had the Amiga 500, and I always kind of wished I could have a 3000.
Yeah, I never had the 500 at all. But I at the time I was working in a computer store, so I got a great break on the price in between the employee discount, and Commodore actually had a nice and even further break for employees, so it cost me next to nothing to buy one of them.
They were awesome machines, because the Amigas, I really, really, really liked them. I had an ST before, and didn't like it and sold it and kind of cut loads of lawns one summer and managed to get myself an Amiga 500. How did you get into Linux and Unraid?
Unraid, I'm a media whore. Originally I had just this banks and banks of USB hard drives connected to the computer. And then after I had a failure of one of my hard drives, I started thinking about how can I do backups on the system. So I wound up backing up everything onto DVDs. And then one day I started looking at how much I'm spending on DVDs in order to back all this stuff up. And it worked out that I'm actually save a lot more money if I just bought another hard drive and backed up one-to-one. And then I thought about it, and well, that's kind of still a waste of money. So I actually started looking at network attached storage and parity systems and whatnot. And my big problem with all of them was it was a RAID 5 setup or whatnot. And I really didn't like the fact that if I lost 2 hard drives simultaneously, I lost the entire collection. Just kept on researching, and I ran across Unraid. Because of the no striping, if I lost, say, 2 hard drives, I only lost a portion of the data instead of everything, and that was the huge selling feature for me.
Yeah, I always found I had a NAS box or something, and it got full up, and I didn't have enough space to actually be able to transfer the stuff off there to be able to put on another one, and I couldn't afford to buy another one till I'd sold the old one. So it was always a bit of a catch-22 for me. So, Unraid, ticks all the boxes for that. I just love how you can expand the array out, just as you go. So you weren't really using Linux before Unraid. You were a Windows guy, were you?
Yeah, I never touched Linux at all before I discovered Unraid. If I even heard of it, I'd be lucky. I can't remember I even heard of Linux before Unraid.
Now you're kind of writing programs for Linux, the community applications and all your great plugins,
Well, thank you. I don't know if I'm writing programs for Linux or writing programs for Unraid itself. A little bit two different things. As far as the low level of Linux and whatnot, I really don't know anything. I know how to write do the applications for the OS itself. But when you get to the nitty-gritty of Linux, I'm not an expert on that. I know enough to be able to sound good or kind of fake my way through it in the forum.
So what do you use for your desktop, nowadays? Are you Windows or Mac? Still Windows guy?
I'm still Windows on that. I've got an 11900K Intel CPU on that. My main where I do all the development, the OS on that. And then the server itself is a 10900K with 64 gig of memory.
I saw your first server build. I'm going to try and bring it up on the screen. But I think it's absolutely awesome. I really do. Do you still have it?
No, that's long gone.
Oh, what a shame.
I know. But I was proud of that build. That's why I took pictures of it.
I just love how you've made that, how you've made the rack for the hard drives. That is so cool. It's like, I thought of doing a similar thing. I can see you've got an arcade cabinet just behind you. I bought an old kind of broken one, and I really want to build my Unraid server into it. And kind of like just thinking where I could put the discs, but seeing what you did with those discs, I could build something out of wood and put them all in, so. Yeah,
there was one in the forum. He did a build into an old radio cabinet, and it came out really nice looking. I spend an hour trying to find that now, but the pictures and everything, it was beautiful what he did, But I've switched now from that build. I got a pair of Rosewell 4011 enclosures, 12-bay hot swaps. Cheap little hot swap bays, but they do their job.
As a media collector, I'm going to ask you, how many terabytes are in your server? Are you going to make me feel really insignificant?
77 terabytes right now.
That's probably about the same as me, so I don't feel too bad. Like I don't like it when I speak to people and they tell me they got 200 terabytes. That just makes me really sad.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I figure about every in and around every 2 months, I wind up having to add at least another terabyte in storage in it. My average downloads a month are about 1 terabyte. So. Yeah, my ISP loves me so much. I always have to convince them. It's like, yeah, I bought unlimited internet bandwidth. Stop complaining about the bandwidth I'm using.
With my ISP, I was waiting to get this super fast broadband, 1,000 up, 1,000 down, and they just kept being really slow. I'd cancelled the other one, but I had on my cell phone, I had unlimited data. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to take the SIM card out, put it in a modem, and just use that. And I think I was using about 600 or 700 gigs a month for about 2 or 3 months. So they must have really kind of hated me, I think, for that.
Yeah, I'm
for cell
right
data.
Now at 1,000 down and 300 up. At least it's the down that that's fast enough for me easily. It's the up speed. It's kind of slow nowadays, but really I don't use it. The odd time I'll be streaming while I'm on the road or something, for there, the 300's more than sufficient. But
yeah, I think upload's more important than download myself, really.
Yeah. It all depends on your
I used to have, with my old ISP, it was something like 20 megs up. It really wasn't very cool. You got yourself a beer. I'm gonna crack open a beer myself. Bear with me. I'm gonna open it because. Yeah, I want to join in.
Okay. Yeah, you'll usually find me with a beer in my hand when I'm not working. So. You just spill it.
That exploded a little bit. But I've got my Unraid glass here, so.
Okay. Yeah, I don't use my Unraid glass. It's in the display cabinet.
Yeah, the logo's coming off a little bit. There we are.
But I am wearing the Unraid swag, though.
Oh, yeah.
Customized with the avatar.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Awesome.
That was an argument, right? Trying to get Zazzle to print that off and add that onto the T-shirt, because it's a copyrighted image, technically.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Spends a lot of time arguing with them on that.
So anyway, I better get back on track. Your first plugin, everyone probably knows you for community applications. Was that the first one you created?
In a roundabout way, yes. There was 2 plugins before it, but they're both part of community applications. They were just the forebearers. The very original one was a proof of concept for CA, and it was called repo update. And it was just as I got tired of in the forum trying to figure out what new applications all these Docker authors were putting into their repositories. So I wrote repo update, which kind of kept me informed of it. And that was the very original one. That lasted about 3 weeks or so. And then one of the other forum members saw the potential of it, and in conjunction with him, we created community repositories, which CA is ultimately based upon. But then due to a difference of direction and how we thought the application store, as you might want to refer to it, would go, we parted ways, and I wound up bringing out community applications itself. And it's been all history since then, and tons of fun creating that and keeping up to date on that.
Right, wow. So for people who don't know Unraid, before community applications was a thing, how did people used to kind of get like plugins, Docker containers onto their server?
Before, if you had no idea and if you weren't a forum member, the only thing that came with the system was LimeTech's own Docker repository, which gave you, if you chose to install it, Plex and some other application. I can't even remember what it was. But in order to find anything else, you'd have to visit the forum, and you'd find all these Docker repositories. The repository was just a collection of apps. Like Linux server, as an example, has their own Docker repository, and they have within that the links to all the other 50-odd containers that they make. So you'd add their repository URL to a tab in the system called Docker repositories, and then the system would populate it, and you can pick and choose what to add. It worked at the beginning, but when there was very little authors out there, but CA really made it a lot easier, because what CA does is the authors gives me that Docker repository URL, and then I index it from there and then present it all in a way where you can just add in the single apps, and it's all handled without the user having to know the underlying URLs or anything of the complexities that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, it makes installing Docker super easy, for people. It's a great kind of manager for, I can't really call it a Docker manager because it does plugins too, so.
Slowly, so that it's the same experience as you get on your app store and like Google Play or whatever the Apple store is called. And I'm trying to make the same experience. Docker is a little bit more difficult, and you do need to know like your paths and whatnot, but I'm trying to get CA and apps to be as close as possible to that which everybody experiences on their phones.
A lot of people don't know about with CA is it can actually install containers from Dockerhub as well.
Well, any search that you do, it only happens when you search, and it brings up all the search results of what's already within CA. But in the top right of every search page, there's a link that says search, find more results from Dockerhub. And if you just click that, it automatically searches Dockerhub. And the display looks the same, except there's no icons or anything. And when you install something from there, what CA tries to do is it tries to create the template from Dockerhub so that it's as close as possible to what is normally in CA. It's kind of hit and miss, as it really depends on the Dockerhub repository setup, but most of the time it works perfectly.
Community applications, I'm sure that's kind of what you're most proud of making. But, if we took community applications away out of your other plugins, you must have made, or and you know, there's Appdata backup, Appdata clean, custom tab. I think my favorite one that that you've made as well for me is user scripts. I find that so super useful. But you know, other than CA, which plugin would you say you're most proud of that you've done?
The one I personally use the most of is the unlimited width plugin. And it's one of the very minor ones. But it's just I've got this 49-inch monitor on my Windows machine, and it's Unraid itself is limited to 1920 pixels across, and that just drives me nuts, right? Because just my standard how I look at the server to manage it, my window's larger than 1920, and I don't like these black bars down the side of everything. So the unlimited width, it's just a hack on the CSS. It lets the OS use the full window width. To me, it makes it better. I hate the artificial limitations. But the other plugin that's really I'd be most proud of, and it's also the one I was most selfish on making, is Fix Common Problems. It's a great little plugin, but I was very selfish in making it because it was wholly designed. Yes, it finds a lot of problems with people's servers, but it was really designed to make my life easier with helping people on the forum, as I got tired of trying to go through, analyze everybody's share settings and the syslog and whatnot. So FCP was designed just to do this for me, so that when somebody had a question and its FCP would have already identified the answer for me to help them with.
How many times has Fix Common Problems been downloaded? Do you have a number?
I don't do my plugins as releases, so I don't know actual download counts on anything. There is a popularity count. CA is obviously number one in terms of popularity. And then I believe number 2 is Fix Common Problems. Number 3 is Unassigned Devices. And number 4 is NerdPack, or Nerd Tools now.
When you make a plugin, do you make it because it's something you want to use yourself and you're thinking, right, I've got a problem, I'm going to make this because I want this? Or do you look at the landscape and think, this would be really useful for people, I want to make something that, you know, people are going to use?
The main plugins are all something that I have a use for, right? There are some other I would call them minor plugins that are made to solve specific problems on the forum, like the Docker update patch that I just came out with last month was to solve a problem with 6.11. And not being able to determine if there was updates available. And that was just a quick patch to the operating system. By and large, I'm doing the plugins because I find that there's a need for it myself. And I try to make it at least generalized user scripts. Like, I know over the years you've had some feature suggestions, and I know you have another one that's going to come up soon. This was done originally to solve a problem of mine, and it's kind of progressed from there.
The reason I've asked about custom tabs to be able to run a script, I'd really like to be able to kind of like start up like a VM or something from there, or kind of have something happen before the VM starts up and that kind of thing. But having a button at the top to be able to run a script, I've no idea how difficult it would be to do that. But if it's ever something and you've got a few hours and you think, I remember Ed said that would be cool.
Yeah, it was actually...
I'm putting you on the spot. I know I shouldn't do it, but, you know, I've got to be selfish.
I was thinking about you and that this morning because I knew this was going to come up. And I was thinking, well, you'd have to put in a little confirmation. Do you want to run this? Right? Because, I don't know, I always, if I'm navigating around the OS, I wound up always clicking into a tab that I probably didn't want originally. So instead of running a script right away as soon as you click in it, you need some sort of confirmation.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. But yeah, everything's doable, right? It's just time, right? And unfortunately, my time just, I'm busy. I got a lot always on the go all the time. See that actually coming to fruition soon, TM.
And I'm sure people listening and watching will probably hate me if I don't ask, but plugins or anything in the works that are coming soon that are exciting, or is that something you can't say at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'll go with the second one. Yeah, I can't say at the moment. No, there's nothing really in the works right now, short of more enhancements all the time for CA and working towards my long-term goals on CA.
Okay, I'm going to kind of like switch gears a little bit and go on to one of the user questions because I think it fits in quite well to what we've been talking about. This is a question from Daedalus from the forums, and he asks, Squid, as an author of many widely used plugins, which, if any, do you think should be shipped as part of the OS proper? Can you talk about why this isn't the case? Same question to Ed.
Okay. For the longest time, there was one specific plugin that I just couldn't understand why it wasn't included, and that was Dynamics SSD Trim. It just made no sense as to why it wasn't included to basically run a single line on a script to trim your hash pools. Finally, it did get included, I believe in 6.11, it was finally included. The only other one that really is going to be included, and I think it will, if it doesn't make it into 6.12 final, it'll be in 6.13. Like, this is what I think would be Dynamics File Manager. But a lot of reason why things aren't included per se, because a lot of plugins are just, they're just continual moving targets. Like if you look at CA, there's an update, every other week or so on average, sometimes multiple ones every day. And it's just, if you include plugins within the OS itself, then any bug fixes, feature enhancements, whatnot, then you're limited down right now. I know there's talk about this changing in the future. You're limited to the OS being updated in order to update those plugins. Like I know CA itself is a little bit different. I think even though it's not included per se, I think it is included right now.
Yeah,
it's
so close to being included because you only have to click the button. It's got the tab there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Unassigned devices, whatnot. Like Dan's always doing bug fixes and enhancements on that just to fill in all the needs of everybody. And that just wouldn't be feasible if it was included right now. It really limits us.
Exactly. I think a lot of people, they don't realize that if it, like you say, if it was included in the OS, if you're only ever going to upgrade on a stable version, you might wait 6 months for an update for, fix common problems or unassigned devices when you can just update it all of the time.
Yeah, and at the same token, like because it would be included with the OS too, it's no longer my final say as to what features or bug fixes go into the software. It winds up being LimeText Tom's final say on whether this happens or not. So we lose the flexibility on that.
What plugins do I think should be shipped in? I think ZFS should be shipped in, and as of 6.12, which has just been released in the last few days as a release candidate, ZFS is now in Unraid. So that's what I would like, and many, many other people want. Mine and their wish has all come true. I think now's a good time to talk about the new version of Unraid, which is 6.12.0 RC2, I believe. Let's talk a little bit about ZFS and the pros and cons of people using ZFS and how ZFS has been implemented into Unraid. Andrew, is ZFS something you're going to be using?
I'm probably going to gradually switch over the array drives to be ZFS. or ZFS actually, just because I like the fact, even though there's no striping and access speed's going to be the same, I like the fact that it's going to be able to detect any corruption issues on it. I love that fact rather than having XFS on the array. For the hash pools, I'm kind of on the fence right now. I don't need the speed if setting up a like a RAID 5 or whatever, the ZFS. I'm not a ZFS expert by any means. I don't particularly need the speed with how my system's set up. So I'm kind of on the fence. I'll probably switch to it at some point. But right now, honestly, I'm going to wait a couple revisions for ZFS just because once I put this onto production servers, yeah, I want my data to be safe. I don't want any surprises and whatnot on that. And my test server is barely functional. Like, it's worse than the picture that you showed of the original system there.
So advantages of ZFS, definitely data integrity. And for people that don't know, how that works, ZFS basically does a checksum of each individual block on the disks. And as it kind of reads the data back, if that checksum doesn't check out, so long as the pool has got redundancy, it can actually rebuild that data and correct it. So for all people who are worried about bit rot, ZFS is great for protecting you against bit rot. The only time that it won't auto protect you, is if you have a single disk ZFS pool, because obviously there's no copies of the data for it to be able to, but it's still, like you say, using it in the array, it can still tell you there's a problem.
Right, exactly. And even in a hash pool, it'll tell you there's a problem. It can't fix it.
No, but then if if you've got backups, like everyone should have, I hope all you guys do have backups, because RAID is not a backup.
No, it's not.
So, so then, if you realize the data is corrupt, because ZFS will tell you, it gives you a chance to be able to, restore it from a backup. Or maybe even if you've done snapshots, you may be able to go back to an earlier snapshot and pull the correct data out of that. So even if you don't have redundancy and you have a single disk, ZFS for data integrity is, really, really good. I must say, I was really surprised when I saw this version of Unraid that ZFS was actually in the array drives as well. And I think that's absolutely awesome, because one of the really excellent features I like about ZFS is ZFS Send, how you can send data from one computer to another using ZFS. If you use rsync and say you had a vdisk of a VM that was 500 gigs, a terabyte, the first time you copy that is going to take, I don't know, maybe an hour. And then if you fire up that VM, you download one MP3 into the vdisk, that vdisk has changed, but rsync would see the whole file has changed. And then when you go to back it up again, it would have to transfer the whole thing. But the great thing about ZFS Send is it knows the blocks that are changed, and it will send just the changed blocks to the other server, and it will just take a matter of seconds that would take an hour. And that's what I really like about ZFS. Personally, that's probably one of my favorite features about it. Because we can have that in the actual Unraid array, I could pretty much set up 2 servers and have everything duplicate across the 2 very fast. Another really good feature, in my opinion, for ZFS is compression. The ZFS will compress things on the fly. You can set the compression level for the file system to various different methods. Some have a greater compression level that are slower, and some will have not such a good compression ratio that are faster. But the default one is a good balance of both. You can actually save quite a lot of space when you use compression in ZFS. A lot of people worry that it's going to slow the file system down, but it can actually make it faster because with spinning Rust disks, you're limited to how much data you can get off there in one go. So taking compressed data off and having the CPU decompress it, you get more data in one go because the CPUs nowadays are so fast, so it will actually make the read and write speeds actually faster with the compression than it would be without.
Yeah, I would think that with today's CPU speeds blowing away even SSDs, that you're not really ever going to notice a slowdown unless your CPU is bogged down with VM or whatnot running at the same time. You'd hardly notice it, if at all.
Most of us Unraiders, we've got a lot of data, so anything that can kind of like stop us having to buy a hard drive quite so quickly is quite good.
No, we don't have much data. None of us have a lot of data. Come on.
And any other advantages you can think of at all, Andrew, that I'm not saying? I'm sure there's a whole load that I haven't said.
It's really like the big advantage of ZFS is the access speed. If you need the speed, once you get to striping, you have just using 2 SSDs, you're now reading twice as fast off of instead of the one single SSD. That's the primary advantage of ZFS as far as I'm concerned.
So obviously there's a lot more speed because you're reading off if you've got a 3-disk pool of ZFS, you're reading off 3 drives at once because of the striping across it, which on Unraid at the moment we're only reading off the 1. But people have to realize if they format a disk in the array as ZFS and not making a separate pool, it will be the same speed as it would have been if they had an XFS disk. Because it's not striped. Even if you put every disk in your array as ZFS, they act as individual drives with an individual file system.
But that might change in the future.
But I think it's good that it does do that. A downside of ZFS is if you're trying to run an energy efficient server. If you had an array of 20 drives in a Z pool, those drives will never spin down. It's kind of all or nothing. That's one really good thing about the Unraid array is when a disk isn't being used, it can spin down.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if you wanted basically an array, just ZFS, right now Unraid still requires a traditional Unraid drive. But nothing says that just can't be a flash drive or something small set up as disk 1. And then it's all just you work off hash pools from there on in. So nothing says you can't have just a ZFS setup and it totally ignore the Unraid array altogether, as long as you have something assigned to it right now. Hopefully that'll change in the future where you don't need the traditional Unraid array.
I'd never thought of that. So you could, use a cheap flash drive just to be your kind of disk 1. Would that be a bit risky, though, if you think of, like, all of the system files that would be on that flash drive as well?
You'd put them all into the pool.
You'd just put the path out, right, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually kind of how my test server set up. I have the boot Unraid flash. My data disk is actually a 16 gig flash drive. My hash pool is a 320 gig hard drive. Effectively, it's all I'm using is the hash pool on that system. All right, it's kind of a weird setup, but it suits my purposes as the test rig altogether.
On one of my old servers, an old test server, I just ran an NVMe drive as the disk 1 in the array with no parity, and that was when I was first messing around with ZFS with the plugin, and then I could use the rest of the drives as a Z pool. But any other sort of disadvantages you can think for people who are using Unraid for using ZFS?
ZFS is a memory hog. Now, I know it can be adjusted down, but it's going to use pretty much as much memory as it can get on the system.
What does it use the memory for, Andrew?
All for caching. Right, it helps it speed up the reads, the writes, everything like that.
So the files are held in the RAM, the ones that are being used sort of like the most. It will keep a copy of it there for speed. Yes. Right.
Yeah. Like George or Jorge is the real expert on this, but that's if you start looking and researching into ZFS, they start talking about how ECC memory is a requirement on it. Now, ECC memory isn't a requirement, but once you start using RAM extensively, well, you better, for the storage and as a cache, you better make sure that your RAM is 100% perfect. Right? If you have a marginal server and if you have the odd RAM error that you just don't notice, well, now you're going to automatically introduce corruption into that pool. Sure, it should hopefully detect it, but it's just not something you want. Right? I would think that your server should be rock solid. Right? If you're counting on ZFS to solve your problems because you have unclean shutdowns causing and you have corruption because of that, well, ZFS isn't going to help you there because you got more important issues to deal with on that.
How much memory should you allocate for ZFS? I've heard that it should be roughly 50% of the RAM that you have in the server.
I believe that's like what its defaults are. I know it used to be that they'd recommend 1 gig of memory for every terabyte of storage you had, which is a little bit excessive. The actual minimums that it needs, I think pretty much it'll run if you have 2 gig of memory available. It really recommends 8 gig. If there's a very limited supply of memory, then it's just your performance suffers.
So basically, if you don't have much memory, it's just not going to be able to cache many files in the RAM. So, it's not really the end of the world.
No, it'll still work.
Another downside that people have to think about when they're running a ZFS pool is on the Unraid array, if you were to say you had 1 parity drive, we all know we can lose 1 drive and recover from it. And if we were to lose 2 drives, we would only lose those 2 drives. So if we had another 5, we've got all of the data on there. But if we had a ZFS pool with 1 drive of parity, we can lose 1 drive and rebuild. If we lose 2 drives, goodbye to all of the data. The same on any system that runs ZFS, because it stripes the data across all of the disks. So what you're kind of gaining from the speed, you're risking, should more drives fail, that you will lose everything. So that's something to consider.
Years and years ago, I inadvertently lost all of my wife's art kids, the baby pictures. I lost every single one. It was a stupid mistake. I just inadvertently formatted the drive.
But you did have a backup though, Andrew, yeah?
Yeah, no. But it taught me something. And this was way before I used network attached or any backup for redundancy. But it taught me something, that I'd rather lose a portion than everything. No matter what, on the stuff that, I just don't want to get yelled at for constantly. And she still brings it up here and there, unfortunately.
So, things like photos, you don't need a great deal of speed to look at your photos, So having them on the Unraid array, things like that, the Unraid array is still ideally suited for, data where you don't need really, really fast read and write speeds. And another thing, for people to think about with the speed of the array or a Z pool is if you have 2 computers connected by, just a normal gigabit Ethernet, you're going to be limited by the speed between the 2 machines anyway. No matter how fast, you could have 100 NVMe drives in a Z pool on both machines, but when you're transferring a file from one to the other, you're going to be capped at 125 megs per second. You would need, faster network for transferring those files. I'd like to kind of just go back to the fact of having ZFS formatted drives in the array, is that should one of those drives fail, it's built in the normal way from the parity. You could have, if you wanted, why you would, I don't know, but you could have a disk of each file system that Unraid does in the array. You could have Riser FS, XFS, Btrfs, and a ZFS in the array. But, one thing I think that, I'm going to do personally is I'm not going to change all of my drives in the array to ZFS, but I may change one where I want to do backups to another machine where I want to use ZFS Send, so I'll still be able to use that from the array just with the one disk. Let's talk about some of the other kind of new things that are in Unraid 6.12, which I really like. I was running the test version for a while and never knew about this until the RC version came out. Is the dashboard, you can actually drag the icons around and put them wherever you like. And I made a video at Christmas saying that was one of my wishes, and it's
and then all of a sudden, boom, it's there. So look at the influence you have.
It's like having Christmas all over again in March. Yeah. Like, how lucky, hey?
Yeah, the dashboard though, that feature, and it's a lot easier for a programmer to add tiles onto the dashboard now. But unfortunately, it did introduce a big incompatibility where any program that would hack into the dashboard on 6.11 and previous, it just doesn't work anymore, and it actually crashes the entire dashboard. So there's a bunch of plugins that just don't work at the moment.
Can you tell us any of those plugins that we should maybe stay away from, maybe not upgrade if they're important to us?
Okay, GPU stats, dislocation, Plex streams. There's also NUT and IPMI tools. Those have been forked and they are now available from Simon F, a new 6.12 compatible version. But the others, if you have a blank dashboard that shows up, it's guaranteed it's a plugin that's causing it. And I've marked them all as being incompatible within CA, so Fixed Common Problems will at least tell you about it, that this is causing you issues.
Are there any other sort of features in 6.12 that people should know about?
It's really the dashboard and ZFS is the main two features. And there's something that really you wouldn't even notice it unless you're looking for either of those two features. There is a lot of under the hood tweaks and whatnot preparing for 6.13 and more features which I think are in the works, but which I can't say for what they actually are.
This is a voice message from Matt.
Hi, this is Matt, and I've been using Unraid since version 4. Indeed, I still have one box running 4.7 with RiserFS, no Docker, and barely any RAM. Anyway, speaking of old technology, I have a couple of questions about the conventional wisdom of booting from USB 2 flash drives rather than USB 3. Firstly, what is the thinking behind this? And then more specifically, is it sufficient to connect a USB 2 flash drive to a USB 3 port, or do you need a USB 2 port as well? I hope you can provide some answers, but either way, really pleased to have the podcast back, and thanks for all you do to help the community.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Matt. Do you know the answer to this one, Andrew?
Okay, the wisdom in the forum of trying to use USB 2 drives versus USB 3 was simply a matter of reliability. Anecdotally, USB 2 drives were more reliable. They wouldn't drop offline for no reason, and it just plain worked, whereas USB 3 for a lot of users was sometimes iffy and hit and miss on whether it would work right all the time. But as we've progressed on the later kernel versions, the USB 3 support has very significantly improved, and those problems have pretty much dropped away. Not to nothing, but it's still night and day compared with how it was from a couple years ago. Like today, I wouldn't even think twice about whether you get a USB 3 drive or a USB 2, which means that you're going to be using USB 3. The only thing is you want to use a name brand drive. Like you want to use a SanDisk or a Kingston. Don't just use any drive that you just find kicking around your house. You know, that's the real issue there. Is their USB drives are just banged off in the billions all the time. And the name brand, if you're paying an extra $5, $10 for a flash drive from a name brand, and you're thinking that it's the same as this no-name brand that you're finding at Walmart, there probably is a difference. You pay for what you get, just like anything else. At least in my system, It's the cheapest part. It's like it cost me nothing compared to the license, the hard drives, the CPU. I have no problem spending an extra $10 on it, is it's still dirt cheap compared to everything else. And I want reliability.
I totally agree. Don't go and find an old USB drive in a drawer that's been there for 9 years and you think, well, it's still okay. Chances are you'll be replacing it in a year.
Yeah, or sooner. Like as far as I'm concerned, there's still a lot of people that question why even use a USB drive to boot from because they're quote, quote, inherently unreliable. I've been using my same flash drive since 2012. No trouble, and I'm probably really hard on my flash drives just from handling everything that I do. And I have no problems with it at all.
But I've heard so many people say, oh, why can't it be installed on a hard drive, But, it's booted into RAM anyway, so it's not writing to it all the time. I think people kind of think the operating system's writing to it a bit like Windows, but it's just not. It's
only if you change a setting. Like if you change a setting in network settings or something like that, does it actually write to the flash drive? All other times it's read straight from RAM. That's it.
And if you install a plugin and that kind of thing, I believe that's written to it just the one time, but then every time you boot, it's just in RAM.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just changes, and you're not writing to it all of the time while your server's running. It's just sitting there doing nothing until you reboot. Really, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to the next question, which is from dansushi about gaming on VMs. I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. Says, I keep hearing about how you can have a gaming VM on Unraid. What are the methods that people are using to actually connect to the gaming VM? If I have my Unraid server in one room of the house and I want to use the gaming VM in another room, do I have to buy a laptop and then remotely connect to it? Or can I have a spare keyboard, mouse and monitor? And is there some sort of NUC or Raspberry Pi or other cheaper device that you can use to actually access the gaming VM? Well, if you don't mind, Andrew, I'll answer this one because I actually do the very same thing myself. With a gaming VM, obviously you're passing through a GPU, and if you've got an NVIDIA GPU, you can use just the NVIDIA game streaming. You can stream to Android. If you've got an Android box like the NVIDIA Shield, you can just plug a controller into the NVIDIA Shield, a keyboard and mouse into the NVIDIA Shield, and you can just access Steam, all of your games, and just stream them across. I would say make sure you're on a wired network if possible to get the best performance. If you haven't got an NVIDIA Shield and you want something cheaper, you can use a Raspberry Pi, but the prices of Raspberry Pis at the moment are crazy. I looked on eBay, I think it was £150, which is probably close to $200 for a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gigs. Before the pandemic, I think I bought one for about £65. So, but they'll come down again. I've heard they are going to go down around April. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But you can use an open source version of the NVIDIA game streaming if you're using a Raspberry Pi. I'm going to bring this up on the screen. This is called Moonlight. You can install this on a Raspberry Pi, and it will just do the same as the NVIDIA game streaming. It's just an open source implementation of what you'd have if you use the NVIDIA version on Android or something. Another thing you can use is you can use something called Parsec. Really need a PC for that though, so if you've got another PC, you can use Parsec. This is the website for Parsec. You can download it for Windows or Mac OS, and basically it will stream the whole system to your laptop or, whether it's Mac or Windows. I haven't used Parsec myself, but a lot of friends have, and they say it's really good. There's a free version for individual use. There are different ways of doing it. You certainly can do it, in another room, should you want to.
Have you ever tried running your HDMI or over Ethernet and just doing a straight connection that way? And that way you're interacting directly with the VM instead of a third party, or?
I have, and I actually thought of doing that. I've built like an office on the side of the house, and I've got my kind of Unraid server with various VMs that run here. And I found on Amazon some cheap optical HDMI cables. They work really, really well, and they go really, really far. And I've actually got the optical HDMI going through. I got the builders to put a hole through the wall, and I got that going in the back of the main TV in the living room, and I put a USB cable through so I can put my so I can plug that in, so I can sit in the on the sofa and game there. So
I'm lucky because my server racks are right behind the wall of where my main entertainment system is. So it's just a real short HDMI cable just going straight through there, and I can access everything directly. But I did try using remotely. It was the HDMI was no problem. It was the USB. But I tried cheap on that and just a real cheap USB extender. And it was like, yeah, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. All in all, it was good success. But next time I try it, I'm going to actually not buy the cheapest thing possible just to see whether it would work.
Moving on to the next question. This is from Mr. Traxson on managing multiple Unraid servers and clustering. And Mr. Traxson says, I own many Unraid servers and I believe I'm not the only one. What are some features you wish Unraid would add for users who own and manage many servers? I wish there was better Active Directory domain services. You can connect to a domain, but it's pretty buggy and not very user-friendly. I think it'd be nice to have a way to cluster your Unraid servers to enable hardware and storage sharing and better management of multiple servers. What's your thoughts on that? Well, for home users, I really don't think you need kind of like proper kind of clustering and, having kind of failover of Docker containers and things like that. So for the most, I don't think people would use that side of it, but obviously there would, I'm not saying there aren't people who would. For what I would like, I would love to see an Unraid server be able to have its array and have it spread across 2 servers. So I can go onto my movies share, see all the movies on server 1, and if server 2's on, I see the movies that are there as well. So maybe I can put all the old movies that Vanessa tells me I should delete because we've already watched them, and why do we bother having them anymore? Onto the backup server, and then switch that on. Or in my perfect world, it would all be built into the operating system, and when I want to access that server, if it's not on, it will send a wake on LAN ping, wake it up, and I'd use that as some sort of cold storage. That would be awesome, but I'm sure it's not something that is going to be implemented.
No, I don't know. I'd love to see that too, or a seamless, like in the user share system, it automatically accesses or includes the files on the remote share. You can do it with unassigned devices, but it's, now that you mention it, having UD automatically send a wait on LAN command when you access that other server, that'd be ideal. I don't know if that's doable or not, but the seamless including that second server within the first server's user shares, that would solve a ton of problems and solve a lot of my problems too.
Yeah. Well, what I did recently, Andrew, is I kind of made some scripts to do a real kind of janky way of doing that. Is I would have like an rsync script that would copy the latest kind of movies and TV shows that I had of the last month onto a Gen 8 microserver, because that only uses 28 watts. I had a version of MB on there that would run. I had various kind of wake on LAN things, but what I found worked best was actually a smart plug to, over HTTP to turn it on and have, the BIOS set so when the power comes back, it turns on. But what that allowed me to do is, in the UK, electricity's just kind of gone crazy expensive. It's apparently going to be about 50 pence a unit soon. I've got some solar panels on the roof, but it's always trying to kind of make the battery not run out during the night. So I thought if I can somehow have that go on, my wife, she doesn't watch old movies and stuff. So long as it's the kind of like the latest month of stuff, her and the kids will be happy. So it was one way of being able to. I need to go and revisit that sometime and try and make it work better. But to be able to have Mover kind of like move files based on their last access time to another server, that would be just. Oh.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I don't know, like whenever I had when I had that dual setup, I was always, if I ran out of space on the second server, I'd be having to manually move all the movies back and forth, trying to keep it reasonably full and then free up the space on the main server. And it was all done through unassigned devices. But yeah, like you said, moving automatically the oldest movies, whatnot, without thinking about it too much. And then if there's some way to trigger, Plex automatically picks it all up automatically, and it'll sort it all out where the files are if it's set up properly.
Or even if the in the file system, when you went to the share, if the other server was off, it would kind of know that file should be there. Kind of like when you kind of use a cloud service when you haven't got the file there, it's got a little picture of the cloud, that kind of thing. Yeah. That'd be super cool.
We'll have to bug them about this. This is our dream list.
Moving on to another question, and this is from Stefano.
Hello, Squid. Hello, Ed. Hope both of you are doing well. Ed, have you entertained the idea of making videos about smart home devices and integrating them into containers running within Unraid?
Oh, hi, Stefano. Nice to hear your voice and hope you're doing well. No, no, that's a joke.
Yes, I was hoping you would be, so.
I'm not sure if you mean kind of integrating smart devices into containers as in maybe kind of starting them up and that kind of thing, or you're talking about making videos with MQTT and integrating that with Home Assistant, that kind of thing. In my house, I have a whole load of Zigbee buttons that run with Home Assistant, and I can press one of the buttons and it will start up a VM or start a container. I think I will be making some videos on home automation for sure. Currently been working on various containers to install VMs. And the next one is to install Recalbox, which is an open source emulation distro. But I'm thinking of doing that for Home Assistant as well to make it kind of it will just download the ISO from there and install it as a VM, because I think Home Assistant, in my opinion, runs better as a VM than it does as a Docker container. I hope I've kind of interpreted your question properly.
I'd like to say that I'd also love to see them too. Because right now I've set up all my the doorbells and everything, the lights, all set up through through Alexis. I'll edit that.
Oh, Andrew, you can't say. Will trigger everyone's.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's just try it. We're gonna have fun. So, yeah, mine just turned on too. But yeah, I've set it all up through the Amazon device, and I'm really curious as to what you can actually do with this. I keep making a mental note to start looking at Home Assistant, but the system's working fine right now, but I'd like to really know, what can I really do with what I have? What kind of ideas can I get to further automate this house? And I'd like to see what other people can do. And if I have to buy some hardware, so be it. But I want to know what.
So Home Assistant's not something you've played with as yet?
Not as of yet, no.
Oh,
I've looked at it. I'm like, yeah,
it's a big rabbit hole. It wastes a lot of time.
Yeah, I can believe it. Well, it's just getting the Amazon device to do it it was challenging at times too. But I'm very curious in looking at see what you can do.
Well, you can pretty much do anything you can think of with Home Assistant because it just joins everything together. I've got some really dumb things in my house, like in my office. If I hate it when Amazon just open the door and put a package in my front porch. It just really annoys me. I think, why can't you ring the doorbell? The doorbell's right there and they don't do it. They just open the door and put it there, and I don't know. So I thought, right, I need a door sensor. So I've got a Zigbee door sensor made by some cheap Chinese company. So when the door opens, my lights will flash red in the office. And I think, the front door's opened. Just little things like that can be quite useful. I've got a stupid thing on the stairs. In my front room, the stairs go from that room upstairs. The banisters are kind of like made of this kind of glass stuff. So I put an LED, when I made the banisters, I put an LED strip in the glass. And when it gets to midnight, the stairs turn red. So I know it's late. I don't need to look at a clock. It's just really, you know, pointless stuff, but it's kind of fun. I kind of like setting it up more than the functionality of the use I get from it. I like visual cues for things. I don't like using Alexa very much. I prefer to use a button. So I've got lots of Zigbee buttons everywhere. Like I've got one in the front room. It will turn the TV on, the amp, this, that, and the other. You know, 2 presses will, you know, turn it all off.
One of my favorite hobbies is I get into arguments with all the time where she just doesn't listen, doesn't understand what I'm saying, and I will argue with her. And she keeps like, do you want to send feedback? I'm like, well, you're already recording everything I say. What do you think? Like, yeah, it's just fun. My wife looks at me and just laughs her head off because I'm arguing with this speaker. But yeah, you got to have some fun in life.
Right. So I think that's brought us to the end of our user questions. Definitely, if you want some, Andrew, you know, some Home Assistant videos. I'm hoping that if I do it, it might remind you of the of the custom tabs script button. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. I have it written down in a task board I have, so I don't forget everything.
You know, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time, Andrew. It's been an absolute blast talking to you. You're one of my Unraid heroes, and I've been really nervous speaking to you all week, thinking, man, you know, this is the guy that, you know, made community applications and, you know, has made my life so, you know, easy. And I really appreciate all the work you've done. And I'm sure, you know, the whole community, we all give you a big thank you. And, you know, we really, really appreciate your work.
Well, I was nervous about talking to you because you're so used to doing all these videos and everything and being on camera. And to me, I'm nobody compared to you, you know?
Oh, not at all.
Yeah, that's just how I think. So, but thank you for letting me be here.
I hope you have a great weekend, and I send thank you very much to your wife for letting us steal Andrew on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, she's
you
right
know,
here.
we all really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hopefully, I'll speak to you again soon, Andrew.
Definitely, I hope so. Have a good
Thank you
one,
very
Ed.
much.
All right.
You too. Oh, there we are.
Okay.